The Acura Integra is legendary. You might know it from the history books. You might know it from its classic spider eye headlights. You might know it from the Fast and the Furious. But no matter how you know it, you do know it. And you probably love it. And the best part of loving the Integra is that it's still lovable today in the 2025 model year.
This is the 2025 Acura Integra Type S, the embodiment of a high-class passion project from the factory. And I'm Alanis King. Let's go for a drive and stick around for the end of this video to get this Integra's full report card.
The Acura Integra is as old as Acura. The brand launched in the United States in 1986 as a performance luxury nameplate with two models, the Legend and the Integra. In launching the cars, Acura said, I quote, "The Acura automobiles are performance drivers' cars. Spacious on the inside, they're designed to satisfy the most demanding driver while delivering the kind of efficiency intelligent people demand today." End quote. The original run of the Integra had 4 generations. The car launched with 113 horsepower and a 5-speed manual or a 4-speed automatic transmission. And the first generation ran from 1986 through 1989. The second generation was from 1990 through 1993, debuting with 130 horsepower. The third generation, which arrived on the market with 142 horsepower, lasted from 1994 through 2001. And the fourth generation, which Acura renamed the RSX here, ran from 2002 through 2006. It debuted with 160 horsepower, but a later RSX Type S model climbed all the way to 210. Throughout this time, the Integra was all over the map. It won racing championships, and it was on the big screen. The Integra became a legend. Then it died.
The Integra was gone for about 15 years. Then, in late 2021, a bright yellow Integra prototype debuted. The Integra was on its way back with a turbocharger and a manual transmission, and it was returning to a car market that, at least in America, doesn't really buy cars like the Integra anymore. The new car market here is dominated by automatics and SUVs and electrification. And to me, automakers justify producing new manual gas cars as a marketing exercise. This car is cool and sporty, and by default, it makes other Acuras look cool and sporty. And this is especially powerful for an automaker like Acura, which has an entire style line called the A-Spec. The A-Spec is a sport appearance package that just gives you options like a red interior, and you are going to feel so much sportier in an MDX SUV with a red interior if Acura also makes the Integra, which is sporty. But you know what? I did not give Acura or car enthusiasts enough credit, because in 2024, American Honda reported selling 24,400 Integras. And sure, that's not the biggest number in the world. American Honda sold 240,000 Civics last year, but 24,000 is about half of what Acura sold for each of its mainstream SUVs, the RDX and the MDX. People are actually buying Integras, and that's awesome.
The modern Acura Integra is a sport compact that slots in under the more expensive TLX, but also looks a lot like it. The Integra starts at $33,000 American dollars, and that base model has 200 horsepower and a continuously variable transmission. The cheapest version, with the 6-speed manual, is a fancier spec than the base model, and it starts at $38,000, but keeps that same 200 horsepower engine.
The big step up is this car. This is the Integra Type S, which starts at $53,000. It has a turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder engine that makes 320 horsepower and 310 pound-feet of torque. And all of that goes through a 6-speed manual transmission to the front wheels. And when you're looking in this engine bay, you notice a couple of interesting things. The turbo assembly is very, very visible up here. Also, you have some faux carbon plastic right here. And if you look over there at the battery, it has what looks to be a portable cooler on top of it. There's just a bunch of insulation on it. And another thing I absolutely love about this car is that all of the vent openings in the front and on the hood actually lead somewhere. They're not fake. Look, I can stick my fingers through there. This car also has an active damping system, which allows the suspension to feel different between the different drive modes. And it also has a limited slip differential for the drive wheels, so you can put your power down really well. All of this leads to a pretty smooth driving experience. The Integra Type S also has 2 of my favorite features in modern cars, and that is lane keep assist and adaptive cruise control. And I think those features are especially cool when you're in a car with a manual transmission, because you go from shifting your own gears and doing your thing to a mundane stretch of highway, and you can just let the car take over those minute little inputs for that mundane stretch, then go back to your normal thing once that is over. And cars are able to do that because they can see what is around them. That's the current state of automotive technology, and our partner Magna is working on the next one. Future cars won't just be able to see what's around them really well. They'll be able to communicate with other cars and see a really clear picture of what those cars see. If I'm approaching the end of a parking lot in a car and another car is blocking my view of a pedestrian behind it, that vehicle can tell my vehicle about the pedestrian, allowing either me or my automated driving system to see more of what's around the car. This kind of rapidly advancing vehicle-to-vehicle communication will let automated driving systems continue to get better. The goal is that someday these automated cars will all be communicating with each other to safely drive and operate themselves, even in busy and unpredictable environments. Magna has all kinds of cool technology like that, and if you want to learn more, you can check out their socials or their YouTube channel. A fun fact about the Type S is that it's Acura's modern performance badge, like Type R is for Honda. And you might think that R stands for race and S stands for sport, and you would be wrong. R and S do not stand for anything, according to Acura. They're not going to correct you if you think it stands for race and sport, but they're also not going to tell you that you're right, because you're not. The only option on this Integra Type S is a $600 coat of platinum white pearl paint. And after fees, the total price of this car comes to $54,395. And I will admit, when I first got the loan documents for this car and the paint color section said white, I was like, are you kidding me? Acura makes a beautiful blue and a beautiful red paint. Why is it white? But then it got here, and it's this really beautiful pearlescent color. It's almost glittery with how shiny it is, and I think it's really, really pretty if you are a white car person. I will also say though, if you're a Honda person and you're looking at these cars, the Honda Civic Type R has what's called championship white, and it is like the color of a book page. It's this flat yellowish white that is really unique and looks super different on the road. A lot of automakers make pearlescent white, and this is a very good pearlescent white. But check out the Type R first. Not only does this pearlescent white paint look really beautiful, but the entire exterior of the Integra is beautiful. Acura has its front end styling down, especially on the Integra and the TLX. And you can just see it in this car. This is going to age so well, I already know. So in 30 years, we'll be talking about, back in my day, we had an Integra. And the kids will be like, whatever. But they will be able to admit, but this looks good. Also in 30 years, I'll be telling the kids how I used to ask the important questions, such as, how many Atlantises can fit in this Acura Integra Type S's trunk? Now, the Integra Type S is a hatchback, which means we connect directly to these rear seats. And if you want to pop the rear seats down, you will get infinite room back here. I also have the keys to the car in my pocket, so we'll see if I can lock myself in. This is gonna be a low roof kind of deal. Well, I can lock myself in, and I would say with the seats up, this is a two Alanis situation. It's time to drive the Acura Integra Type S, and I am so excited. But before we talk about how this car drives, I want to talk about what the interior is like and what the comfort in this car is like. And when you get in this car, you immediately see the Honda inspiration, because for better or for worse, however you feel about it, this is the shell of a Civic with better materials. This is a done-up Civic, and I love the Civic. That is not a bad thing. But if you were looking for an interior that is not a Civic interior, that's not what you're gonna get in the Integra Type S. When you look at the screen, that's a Civic screen. When you look at the dashboard controls, those are Civic dashboard controls. When you look at the shifter area and your drive modes and your electronic parking brake and everything like that, that is Civic, even down to the air vent controls, which are toggles. So when you move the air vent around, you use a little toggle that comes out. That is Civic, and so is the placement of it. So you get in this car, and if you're expecting something wildly different from a Civic, you're not going to get it. You're actually going to be very surprised at how Civic-y it is in here. Again, that's not a bad thing, but it is something to note for preference. Something to note about this car is that it has wired and wireless Apple CarPlay, and I'm a wireless person, but many, many people are wired people. And it's really interesting that when you look at the plugs in the front of this car, the charging only plug is a USB-C port, the small USB-C. And the Apple CarPlay plug that also charges your phone is a USB-A port. So if you want to use Apple CarPlay wired in this car, you have to use USB-A. And I don't think that's the worst thing in the world, because I think a lot of people have old USB-A chargers that they used on their phones before everything went to USB-C. So if you have one of those old chargers, you can do wired Apple CarPlay. If you don't, that's $10 for you to go spend. Something that is not Civic at all inside this car is the lack of shift indicator lights. A very popular feature of the Honda Civic Type R is the shift indicator lights. It's supposed to mimic a race car or your sim racing setup, and the lights light up from either side toward the middle to indicate when it's almost time and time to shift. There are also beeps. This system has made its way for 2025 down to the Honda Civic Si, which starts at $30,000, but it has not made its way into the Integra Type S. And I get that the Integra Type S is the more grown-up car, right? It's the more mature one. So maybe you don't want shift indicator lights because that's for children, but I would prefer to have the shift indicator lights and be able to turn them off. In this car, you don't get lights, and there's also no beeping in the car I'm in. So when it's time to shift, you just better be looking. The screen will flash red, but you better be paying attention. In terms of comfort in this interior, feels upscale. It's nice to sit in here. I have zero complaints. But what's really funny is that when I first got in this car and I put my hands on the steering wheel, I thought the steering wheel and the shifter texture was so odd. The way I would describe this texture is that it's like a really firm strawberry, and there's a lot of holes in it, and it's very odd. And I thought maybe this was just me, but then I posted a photo of the shifter on Instagram, and my dear friend Nolan Sykes from Donut was like, "How do you feel about that material?" And I was like, oh gosh, it's not just me. Other people think this is an odd material too. Now I've gotten used to it. It only bothered me for about 15 minutes, but those first 15 minutes was a lot of stimulation in my hands to have that many dents in the leather. A couple of other notes about this interior is that the driver has power seat adjustments, but the passenger does not. And I feel like for $54,000, I would want my passenger to have power seat adjustments, but they don't. And a couple of notes about rear comfort in this car. The materials back there are a harder plastic, which is very common in rear seats because one, not as many people are going to be back there, and two, if you have kids back there, you would rather them be messing with the hard plastics than the soft leathers. But also you don't get rear air vents back there, and you also don't get rear charging ports or rear seat heaters. And my baseline for rear seat heaters and rear comfort is that my first car was a 2012 Hyundai Elantra. It was $21,000 new. And it had rear seat heaters. So automakers can do it. They just don't. It's now time for driving impressions in the Integra Type S. And it is so bright outside that I am shifting based on feel because I do not have any beeps to tell me when to shift, and I can't see anything due to the sun. So another argument for beeps right there. Now, I like to start my driving impressions usually by talking about the basic feelings of a car. And the basic feelings in this car, you start with your clutch pedal feel. In this car, I actually was a little surprised when I first started driving it. The clutch catch point, I feel like in this car, is about halfway up the pedal. I don't get any bite or any catch until about halfway up the pedal. And I was expecting it to have a pedal that caught the full range of the release motion on the clutch, and I just didn't feel that. Now, the shifter in this car I really like and I find really interesting. So the movement of the shifter is very Civic SI, very Civic Type R. It's this buttery, light, smooth throw, and my favorite experience is taking this from reverse, which is by 6th gear, up, over, and up again into first, and it is the smoothest and most rewarding action to do that. Now, what I found really funny about this car is the shift lever in the Honda Civic SI and the Honda Civic Type R. They're different. So in the SI, you have this metal shifter with a little bit of leather trim wrapped around it, right? The Honda Civic Type R is this fully metal shifter. It's like the shape of a teardrop, and it's rounded at the top. This is a mix between the two with its own little flair. So we have the leather trim around it and we have the teardrop shape, but then it's like someone took the teardrop shape and just flattened it, and the top is flat, and then the numbers of the gears are pressed into the top in red. And I really like this shifter, honestly. I like the shifter in the Civic Si better than the one in the Civic Type R, and this one might actually take the cake for the one I like the best. It's petite and it's nice, and it's got that leather wrapping so that when it's hot outside or cold outside, you can touch that instead of the metal and you won't burn or freeze your hand, and I like that. You would think that the suspension in this car would be really soft because it's an Acura and it's $54,000. Of course it's gonna be super comfortable, but I'm in Sport Plus mode, where I should be, where everybody should be, and it's quite stiff. Now, it's not punishing like a Civic Type R. A Civic Type R feels like a bucking bronco. You go over different elevations of road and you're like, oh. It's very break your back punishing, as people like sports cars to be. This is stiff without just punishing you, and I do like that because it gives a great driving feel without wearing you out. The steering precision in this car is awesome. It's just that Honda perfect precision. And you know, I'm really glad that the steering feels so good in here, because I was actually a little disappointed in the Acura TLX's steering. It felt very disconnected from the road, and it also didn't communicate a lot to you. So the car would be doing one thing under you and the car would handle the road great, but the steering was so disconnected that it was disorienting. This steering is perfectly connected to the road. I could feel the tires under me, I could feel my traction, and it's communicating with me, and it's not disorienting because the steering feel is what I feel under the car, and that is wonderful. In addition to that, the power is great on this car for a front-wheel drive vehicle. So I'm about to go into a really hard turn, and I'm going to pop it down into second gear. I'm not going to take the turn hard, but I'm going to come out of the turn right here and pop the power down. Oh, it's so good, and there's only a little bit of torque steer, just a tiny bit of torque steer. And something I love about this car and the Honda Civic Type R and this just lineup is that you have amazing rev matching just all the way through the gear range. This could be a chauffeur car. Not only is it great to drive on a road like this, but you could quite literally be a chauffeur, an Uber driver, a Lyft driver, whatever kind of chauffeur you want to be, and no one would be any wiser except for your hand moving that you were in a stick, because the ride is so smooth. It is extremely impressive. I love how driving these cars feels, and you go into a turn and it sounds good and it feels good, and I am so glad. You could say that this is just a Civic, but who cares? I'm so glad another Civic exists. Another styling interpretation, another performance interpretation of a great car. Amazing. One of the more unexpected things on this car is that the brake bite is really, really good. So the pedal isn't super stiff, but when you hit the brakes, the initial bite is wild. You just saw my hair go forward, right? I didn't even hit them that hard. They just scrub speed so well. I mean, look at that. Now, I will say, the one thing about the brakes in the car in general is that there is a ton of weight shift when you brake. So your nose dives forward. You are scrubbing speed very quickly, and that's great, but your nose is going like this. So I would recommend, when you're braking in this car, generally focus on whether you're in a straight line or not, because if you start braking while you're turning, that weight shift will cause the back end to get very loose and very light. And that's a little fun sometimes, but you need to know about that, because you don't want to get yourself in trouble with a squirrely back end just because you didn't know that it was happening. Would I buy this car or the Honda Civic Type R? I think it's close, and I think it depends on your preferences. But ultimately, I am a more childish person, and I'm someone who wants to save money. So, $45,000 to be a child versus $54,000 to be an adult. $45,000 all the way. Now that we've driven the 2025 Acura Integra Type S, it's time to give it a grade. Welcome to Alanis's report card. The exterior on this car gets an A. I have no notes. It's beautiful. The interior gets an A-. I was a little surprised that Acura put piano black around the shifter in a place where Honda has put this really nice herringbone pattern. And there's also a lack of comfort features in the rear seat. You don't have vents or chargers or seat heaters or anything back there, so we lose points for that. The performance on this car gets an A-. I think the only reason I'm giving it that is because it's front-wheel drive, not all-wheel drive. And when you're $10,000 more than the Civic Type R, maybe just do all-wheel drive. Value on this car gets a B-. And I decided that. I said, this is a B-. And then I went back and I checked what I gave the Honda Civic Type R. And I gave it a B. Since this is $10,000 more than the Civic Type R, I knew that it had to be less than that on the value scale. And it was, so it works. Would I take this car on a road trip? Yes, I would. It's super comfortable. It's got the adaptive cruise control. It's got the lane keep assist. It will be so nice. And overall, I hovered between a B+ and an A- on this, on the actual averaging of the grades. And I bumped it up to an A- because I'm so glad that this car exists.
The Acura Integra Type S is beautiful, from its pearly white paint to its upscale interior. It's refined from the way it feels to the way it drives. It's all of those things, and it's also somehow cool, sporty, and full of personality. That's not easy to do.
But perhaps most of all, the Acura Integra Type S exists in the same timeline as you and I do, in a car market where cars like this aren't integral anymore. And we are so lucky that that's the case.